Hello, I'm Dr. Pierre Simon, and it's wonderful being back with you as this part of part 3 in our talk of sexual addiction is another important aspect of sexual addiction that we need to talk about. We're for healing, peace, and harmony in your life, in my life, in all of our lives. That's what we want, and I know that's what you want as well. When we're dealing with sexual addictions, it's confusing, it's difficult, sometimes even scary, especially for victims. That's why we're talking about it, because it's a condition situation, behavior, addiction that is so damaging, but it's so secretive. So you don't hear about it in churches, or you don't hear about it in schools or at the workplace or wherever it may be, not even with perhaps social activities. It's one of those things that people don't talk about. And yet it's there. It's like the elephant in the room, and it's causing problems constantly because it never stays the same. It's never how it started out to be. It grows into a monster. There's 3 levels of sexual behavior and sex addiction, and it's a progressive journey of self-nurturing, intoxication, and intensification. And in those 3 levels, as you see in the picture, all those books on those 3 levels, sex addicts have volumes and volumes of how they go about getting what they want or what they feel they need. The intensification, the intoxication, the nurturing, the self-nurturing, the need to get comfort somehow for various reasons. And each of those things have their volumes of how they go about it. And sometimes they go from one volume to another as they move along and progress along the way. So sex addiction is never something, well, let me say, I don't want to say never. Some people stay within a level. Most move on to the next level of sex addiction. Generally, it's something that's progressive, and as they move on, things get worse. And moving on is what we don't want to see. We want to stop it before it moves on, and hopefully we want to stop it when it's at level 1 of sex addiction, because level 1 is where perhaps you might first notice it, others won't notice perhaps, but the person notices. The culture is rather ambivalent of level 1. They don't like it, but they don't know if they should say anything about it, or if it's politically correct to speak against it. It's controversial sexual behaviors. And level 1 sex addiction behaviors are considered by the public as victimless sex addiction behavior. The reality is there are always victims. The victim may be the person themselves, the sex addict, or the victim may be the other person, whether they're involved or just observing or in some other way finding out about it. There's always a victim. But in level 1, the public considers it, oh, yeah, it's victimless. Well, level 1 involves self-stimulation, compulsive relationships. The word compulsive means forceful urge, an exaggeration. So it's not necessarily a bad word, but when you attach it to things that are unhealthy, it becomes bad. So compulsive relationships is a forceful urge to go from one relationship to another, and it's exaggerated. It's not just a normal, well, let's break up and we'll find somebody else. It's they have to break up. They have to find somebody else. It's almost the end of the world if they don't. And that brings about other issues as well with those individuals. Pornography is another level 1 sexual behavior. And unfortunately, you know, the great things about the internet is you get to learn and get answers to whatever you want to look up. But the pornographic industry is making a lot of money using the internet, billions of dollars. And it's unfortunately so easy for young people to begin that level 1 journey using pornography. And it's not usually at home. It's not usually perhaps with friends. Oftentimes I should say it does happen with friends, but oftentimes it's at school, believe it or not. I get more reports from parents that their child saw pornography at school. The kid next to them, hey, look at this, you know, when they're on the internet, when they're in computer labs or during lunch break or whatever it may be with their phones or their laptops or the computer in the library. Hey, look at this. And then it begins their journey of looking at it at home or over at the friend's house. Prostitution is considered a level 1 sexual behavior. Anonymous sex. Anonymous sex can involve various things. You don't know who the person is, and you don't want to know. Or it could be privately in your mind. That's anonymous. Level 1 is politically incorrect to complain about, and yet it's the beginning step into levels 2 and 3. So level 2 of sex addiction is regarded more as a nuisance offense. So, you know, it's an annoyance. It's an irritant to the public, to others. But, if I don't see it, it's as if it's all right. You know, well, that's crazy. Offenders are actively prosecuted on level 2 because somebody was involved. Someone observed what they're doing. There's always an identified victim in level 2, so there's always that other person that's involved in one way or another. The sexual addict is viewed as, oh, they're pathetic. Oh, they're sick. Oh, how disgusting. Oh, they must be mentally ill. They got to be crazy. But you know, they're harmless. They're really innocent. Oh, they're just doing something silly. That's what people will say about that. And yet that's not true. It is, again, a sex addiction, and it is, once again, among the levels which go to the level 3 of more intensification. These level 2 offenses receive the blunt end of people's jokes. Oh, did you see what happened with so-and-so? Or did you hear about this? Or, boy, wasn't that stupid? And then they laugh about it. So, they joke about it, but it is more serious than what they're saying it is. Level 2 behaviors, then, are things like exhibitionism, voyeurism, exhibitionism, showing oneself. I remember when I started when I got out of the Air Force, went back to college. I started at a Christian university, and unfortunately they were on probation from the big denomination that covered them because they were becoming more accepting of certain things, and at that time streaking was the big deal. Running through the campus naked. So some of the fraternities, that was the big deal, exhibitionism in that way. And unfortunately, the university wasn't doing anything about it. It was considered, oh, well, level 2, it's an annoyance or an irritant, but, well, they're expressing themselves. And eventually the big denomination that was covering them dropped the university from their group. And the university later went in a very different direction. Voyeurism is another level 2 behavior. Voyeurism is watching, observing. Generally, it's involved with the sex addict is looking for sexual gratification in some way through seeing someone undress or seeing someone naked or whatever it may be. Indecent phone calls is another level 2 behavior of sex addiction. Indecent liberties, and generally that's considered with children or students. All of those things involve another person as a victim, and those things generally, when observed, involve legal interaction. Then we come to level 3, sex addiction. So there are 3 levels, 1, 2, 3. Level 3 is more extreme. And we can all in our minds imagine what level 3 is. It's behaviors that are violating the cultural boundaries, leading to extreme legal consequences. Now, our cultural boundary in the U.S. May be at a certain place. You go to another country, their cultural boundary may be a little wider, more accepting of certain things, or less, I should say, more tolerant of certain things. You go to another country, it might be narrower boundaries and more reaction to certain things. So culture plays an important role there. We see during the Afghan war, the Islamic extremists with issues of pedophilia and so on. I've read the Quran over the last few years, and not getting into religion or anything like that, but there is a justification that they give that they can do that coming from their holy book. Even if the Bible were to say something that doesn't fit, we question it as Christians. We go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense because it doesn't fit with what the rest of it is saying. So something's wrong there. We need to read into that more. We need to study that more to figure out where did that come from. Was it implanted in there? Was it a misinterpretation, and so on? So good sense becomes very important in recognizing with sex addiction those behaviors that are right and those behaviors that even if someone says it's okay, it doesn't mean it is okay. There's always an identified victim with level 3. Offenders are seen as subhuman in those cultures that have those boundaries that have been violated by level 3 behaviors. So they're seen as, the offenders are seen as, oh, they're beyond help. And they want to be, people want to push that away, they want to push the offenders away, and they consider that's it, and they bring about more rules, more laws, more consequences as a result, because the public is outraged by level 3 behaviors. So you can generally tell if it's a level 3 behavior because of the outrage that comes from it. So what are those behaviors? I'm sure you already know. Child molestation, incest, rape, and perhaps a few others in there are those behaviors of level 3. Behaviors that in our society, they make the hair on the back of your head stand up. And yet, as cultures go through change, somebody has to set the boundaries and reaffirm the boundaries, that is, strengthen the boundaries to keep them in place, whatever they may be. Unfortunately, history shows that boundaries don't tend to get stronger, they tend to get weaker over time. And even the boundaries with level 3 sexual behavior, molestation, child molestation, incest, rape, those boundaries we're seeing being stretched outward. California has a group, an official group, promoting pedophilia, promoting adult sex with, I believe the age is 10. Come on. As ridiculous as that sounds to the rest of the country, you see, years ago, no one would have brought up something like that or even allowed it to become an organization, a legal organization within a state. And now we're seeing that. We're seeing the culture, those boundaries being stretched outward. And only you and I can do anything about that by speaking up or by voting in those ways that are going to help those boundaries to stay firmer and to be more reasonable. Significant contributors to sex addiction, there's things that kind of contribute to it, that add to it. Not always, but most of the time you do tend to see things like alcohol or drugs or a history of sex addiction in the family. I recall many years ago the Catholic Church did a study, a longitudinal study, which is a long-term study. They were wanting to find out, is the Bible accurate when it talks about the curse of the generations, that if something is bad in the family, it tends to bring a curse onto the family for something like 4 or 5 generations, if nothing is done about it. And so they studied 4 to 5 generations. This was in the late 1800s, early 1900s is where it ended up in. And what they found, in particular, one family, and they found that was accurate in the studies that they made, but one family really stood out. That one family started with the study with an individual in the family who was a sex addict and alcoholic. And they followed his generations for 4 to 5 generations. They found within those generations, every member of the family had either a sex addiction problem, a alcoholic problem, a drug problem, syphilis, and other things as well, criminal activity and so on, except for one. And that baffled them, whoa, one person out of all these people in the generations of this particular family, did our data, did we make a mistake on the data, or what happened here? So they had to go back and research that one person. And they discovered that one person had been adopted into the family, and he turned out fine. Now, you can look at that as coincidence. However, it fits with the other studies that were done. It fits with what the Bible says to be true. It fits with what we know about history. It fits with what Jesus told us about those curses, and that he became the curse on the cross when he died for our sins so we can be forgiven. And then it's up to us to stand against it so it doesn't recapture us or continue along down the line of our families. So standing against it would be, I'm free from it now, but I may have seen it when I was a kid, or I may have heard it from dad or mom or brother or sister, but now I'm a Christian. The blood covers me from that curse. It's not handed down spiritually to me anymore, but now I have to resist the memories, the participation in letting those memories affect me. So physical and emotional abuse accompany sexual abuse or sexual addiction. A child is abused physically, emotionally. What happens? Doesn't have to be sexually, but if there's abuse, it's a series, it's continuing, it's damaging. Where's the nurturing? Where's the comfort? Where's the relief? So the child then has to find that comfort, nurturing, and relief somewhere else, with something else. And they seek that level of gratification to de-stress from their abuse or their pain or their trauma. And some turn to healthy things, sports, exercise, making healthy friends, healthy extended family. Some turn to those unhealthy things that are quick and easy escapes in order to feel better and forget the pain, forget what's happening. And those unhealthy things may be sexual activity, pornography, and so on. Level 1, level 2, leading to level 3 stuff for self-nurturing, for escaping, giving them the illusion that they're feeling better, that this is relationship, I'm getting nurtured here, I feel good here, I feel relieved here, but it's a lie. And because it's a lie, it comes back to bite them in the end. It causes more problems, causing them to escape more to what they think is going to help them. And yet they're just repeating that cycle over and over again. Sexual experience is both humiliating and comforting. And that's what happens there. There's a point in which they recognize it's wrong. Others see it as wrong. And even if someone doesn't say anything to them, they feel humiliated on the inside because they need that comfort, or they believe that's the only way they can be comforted. The reality of the child, when the child's accounts of abuse are not taken seriously, is a significant contributor to sex addiction. If it's not taken seriously, how does that impact the child? Yes, there's false accusations that occur. I recall one family, they were separated, and the mother, one of the daughters accused the father of molesting her, and he was arrested, but within a short time of a couple of weeks, they discovered that the daughter was put up to it by the mother. Her vengeance, her whatever, for whatever reasons, she was going to punish him, and was her way of getting back at him. And the terrible thing was, he was a nice guy, and he loved his family, but she was bitter and negative with everybody. It wasn't just him. Gave her power, it gave her control, but it gave her more control over the kids in doing that. And so the legal people, the authorities involved, discovered it was that the mother had brought it up, and she confessed to it eventually. So it does happen like that sometimes. Yet, if you don't take it seriously when the child is saying, "This happened to me," it's impacting the child. So that's why the authorities will take that seriously and then investigate. And it impacts everyone, of course, but in the investigation generally, they learn, they have their ways, and they're good at it. They have their ways of finding out the truth. But that child that's impacted by that, if they're not believed, they need to escape also. So they escape to what's going to comfort them. Patrick Carnes, in the book Out of the Shadows, says the value of the levels of addictions or addiction remains in their ability to underline the patterns of compulsive sexuality. Level 1, level 2, level 3. There's a value in identifying the levels. There's a value in understanding them. There's a value in recognizing that if it's repeated, it's compulsive. It's not just a one-time thing. And if it's repeated, then it's going to follow through in going from one level to the next. So sexual addiction in each level is emotionally painful, and in some cases physically painful as it moves on to level 2 and 3. Deviant behavior is not necessarily an addiction, and that's important to understand. Somebody can do something once, maybe twice. It's kind of iffy if it goes to twice, but somebody can be deviant in doing something, but it's not indicative that they have an addiction. A pattern is necessary for an addiction to exist. So there has to be a series. There has to be a pattern. There has to be a theme going on of that deviancy to be considered sexual addiction or any other kind of addiction. All levels of the addictions transcend things like personality. You can be a certain personality or a very different personality. Sex addiction can still be there. You can have a temperament that is a melancholy, loner temperament, or a sanguine, extrovert of high intensity, or a supine, laid back, or phlegmatic, very democratic, indifferent, or choleric, leader, strong, performance-based. You could be any of those. Sex addiction can occur in any temperament, genders. We see more sex addiction with men, but there is sex addiction with females as well. It crosses the line. It's transcendent. Socioeconomic status, rich, poor, middle, doesn't matter. The statistics are pretty much the same. It transcends all economic statuses. Sexual behavior within and between levels 1, 2, and 3 are reinforced by one another. So one level reinforces another one, goes back to another one, and so on. So they're connected. Sexual behaviors within each level is connected due to other kinds of addictions as well. We spoke about that earlier: drugs, alcohol, work, and so on. Working until exhausted can be a work addiction. It justifies, I deserve a break. I deserve to get my sexual needs met. So it justifies sexual compulsiveness. It excuses it for those that use it. Drinking and cruising are mutually intoxicating for the alcoholic, and that connects as well with sexual addictions. Binge eating routinely follows a visit to a porn shop. You see patterns. Gambling and prostitution are irresistible combination that you often see for those that are working in helping those with gambling addictions. Listen, sexual addiction is not a good thing, yet it can be worked on. Something can be done about it, but because it's so secretive, the person involved is ashamed, humiliated, afraid to talk about it. And sometimes the partner, very often there is a partner, needs to help, needs to encourage to go get that help, to do something about it so it doesn't progress into a level 3. And there's actually a level 4 that I would consider, and I don't even want to really talk about level 4, but level 4 involves a more hideous type of sex addiction level. Next time, we're going to talk about the core beliefs within sex addiction, and I'm sure you'll find that informative and helpful. I hope this was helpful for you in learning a little bit more. I'm sure you've heard about a lot of this before, but there's little things that you can always add to your knowledge base on things like this. And also for those involved with some type of sex addiction, mostly pornography, that level 1, level 2 area, pay attention, do something about it. Don't just sit there and feel terrible and feel humiliated and let that damage all of your relationships. Do something about it. God bless. We'll talk to you next time.